Throughout history, it has been speculated that many have been plagued by an ancient demonic force. From Mesopotamia to more modern times, this evil and terrifying entity has said to enter our world and wreak havoc upon those who dwell within it when a seemingly normal family disregards the warnings and partakes in multiple Ouija board sessions. What happened next nearly destroyed them. This is the untold story of the demonic ZOZO house of Oklahoma and the abhorrent creature that stalks its walls. Oklahoma City, a small but growing city in the heartland of America, known for blue-collar work in brick-and-mortar shops, red dirt and sports, would soon become known for something much darker. A teenager by the name of Darren Evans was growing up here, a normal boy by all accounts, doing things that any teenagers would enjoy. Hanging out with friends, shenanigans here and there, and dating girls. He began dating a girl named Brandy who attended school with him. And the two often found themselves visiting each other as often as they could, whether that was walking to and from school in between classes, or visiting each other's homes. One day, while Brandy's home was having some plumbing work done on some pipes located underneath the house, the plumber doing the work would soon make a strange discovery. Located below the foundation of the home, covered in dirt, was an old Ouija board. The front letters were partially buried, and the back of the board was solid black in color. Off to the side of where the board was found was an aged planchette. What made this finding even more bizarre was that 4 old jars sat on the corners of the board, speckled with dirt as well. Thinking perhaps the kids had stashed the board away and forgot about it, the worker told the young couple after his work was done about what he had found. And it's from here that things seemingly take a darker turn. Upon examining the discovery, they began to brush the dirt away from the jars. They were then shocked by what they found. Inside each one of the jars, sitting on the 4 corners of the board, were the decaying bodies of blackbirds, congealed blood and matter still present. Bewildered but intrigued, they sat the jars off to the side and picked up the board. As soon as his fingers made contact with the board, Darren seemed to have an instant connection with it. And with this soon came a burning curiosity to examine it, and this curiosity would manifest into obsession. With this, the couple took the board inside the home where they spoke with Brandy's mother. She actively practiced the Wiccan religion, but had no idea who could have put the board there several days later. Curious as most teenagers are, Darren was an avid music fan, and one night, after building up the courage to do it, he decided he was going to contact the deceased singer of the popular band AC/DC, a man named Ronald Belfort Scott, using the board. Scott had passed away from alcohol poisoning in 1980. After lighting several candles, laying the board with letters facing towards him, and placing the planchette upon the board, he began his session. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but Darren was still feeling this otherworldly connection to something within the board itself. After trying for half an hour, to his shock and amazement, the planchette began to move. Slowly at first, it then frantically began to move by itself, moving from Z to OZ to O over and over and over again, spelling out the name ZOZO. Shocked and unsure of what or who he had contacted, Darren said goodbye in an attempt to end the session. Before his eyes, he saw the planchette spell out "See you in hell," and then it threw itself across the room. A now terrified and bewildered Darren ran out of his room and tried to make sense of what had just taken place. But this was just the beginning of what was to come. It started with horrible night terrors. He would wake up unable to move or speak and would hear whispering in his ears. These episodes at night were soon followed by banging and knocking throughout his house during the daytime, as well as a constant feeling as if he was being watched by something he couldn't see. But despite the presence he was feeling, Darren now sought answers to his ever-growing list of questions, just what exactly he had uncovered. So he continued to hold sessions with the Lord, for better or for worse. Darren would later quote this: "The sessions now were as intense and paranormal as anything I've ever witnessed. A deep and terrible moaning could be heard emanating through the walls. After these sessions, I developed sleep paralysis and became reclusive to society in general. I was once again messing with ZOZO and Ouija boards, despite the tears of my earlier sessions, in which I had promised myself I would never do it again. But again and again I did. When not in use, the board was kept in a purple silk cloth and stored in his bedroom closet. It would also often go missing, sometimes for days on end. When checking back where he had placed it in order to set up and initiate a new session, the board would seemingly vanish, only to reappear at random times, as if it was the one calling the shots of when it could be seen and used. The years came and went, and the sessions on the mystical Ouija board continued. Darren by this time started inviting his friends to partake in the sessions, and although their sessions with him would prove he's not insane, it's of little consolation considering the tragedy it would seemingly manifest later on. Darren's best friend was a man by the name of Randy. The two had bonded over their love for the band AC/DC in high school and had been inseparable ever since. Randy's idol also being the late Bon Scott, whose lifestyle seemingly imprinted upon the youthful teens once upon a time, and perhaps would ultimately lead to the downfall of one of them. By now, Darren was living in his own apartment and working construction at a job site he was on. He would make a strange but familiar discovery. As he was digging down into the earth, he found what appeared to be a jar. Upon picking it up to discard it, he wiped away the dirt and debris, only to be shocked by its familiar contents. Lo and behold, within the jar was a congealed and rotting blackbird, extremely similar, if not identical to the ones initially found alongside the Ouija board. Underneath his high school girlfriend's home all those years ago, it was particularly weird not just because of this, but the fact that he had found it digging down deep into the earth. He wondered what were the odds of this, and although he had no way of knowing for sure, his gut began to tell him that there was some kind of witchcraft or occult expertise at play here. Perhaps someone or a group of people were knowingly contacting this entity known as ZOZO, but for what remained to be known. One evening in 1985, Darren and Randy were relaxing at Darren's apartment when they decided to host a session on the Ouija board. Randy, more than anything, wanted to try and make contact with his late idol, Bon Scott. While wearing a Highway to Hell AC/DC shirt, Randy's intent was clear. The two dimmed the lights, lit a couple of candles, and began the session upon the board. They made contact within a few minutes. Once the planchette was moving, Randy exclaimed, "We want to talk to Bon Scott of AC/DC with this sentence." The planchette seemingly obliged. It moved in circles, eventually spelling out a "ye mate." The two looked at each other in amazement. The entity was using Australian dialects, and for anyone who doesn't know, Bon Scott was Australian. After several more questions, both of the young men were convinced they were speaking with their idols. The spirits seemed to know every little detail to any question they asked, and during the session the entity then made a strange request from the men. It asked them to light a cigarette and place it in the hole in the planchette. What proceeded to make both of them laugh also made them quite spooked as well, so they lit a couple cigarettes, one for each of them and one for this entity. They took a few drags to keep it lit and then placed it cherry side up in the planchette hole. The planchette then spelled out "thanks." They then watched in utter amazement as the cherry of the cigarette lit up, as if Bon himself was taking puffs off of it. But this amusement was short-lived once the cigarette had seemingly been smoked. The planchette began to spell something very different. It spelled "F you, Randy. I will have your soul and I'll see you in hell. ZOZO." Terrified, the men quickly ended the session by saying goodbye and tossing the board outside the second-story apartment balcony door, clearly scared and upset. Randy also didn't take kindly to threats. He began cussing out ZOZO with complete and utter rage. The board would later be returned by his downstairs neighbor, and after this session, a series of lows for both of the men seemed to manifest in the years to come. Influenced by the lifestyle of his idol, Randy fell victim to alcoholism. He soon would lose his wife to divorce, and have split custody with his son. And although many opportunities presented themselves for Randy to better his life, for one reason or another, he was always just too far away to be able to grasp them. He often said to Darren, "I feel like I'm in a prison and I can't escape." For old time's sake, the two did one last Ouija board session together in 2005, in which Randy asked the board how he would die. The board responded in a car at night, alone. In 2007, after spending the evening with Darren, the last words he would say to him were, "Darren, I will see you in hell." The next morning, Darren received a phone call from Randy's girlfriend, Alicia, saying that Randy never made it home after he left. Instead, he had passed away in a violent head-on collision, ultimately passing away in a car at night and alone. This devastating passing, along with the frequent contact with the entity known as ZOZO over the years, led to a fascination and borderline obsession with the search for answers for Darren Evans. During the time before and after Randy's death, he had been living in a home in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that would become synonymous with the demon's name. It was here that the worst afflictions brought on by the entity would take place to him and his family. Darren's fascination with the occult led him to hanging on to and possessing multiple Ouija boards and other various occult objects. It was here that he began to study on a much more in-depth and organized basis, just trying to figure out who or what ZOZO was. But this research would soon be interrupted. In this home lived himself, his wife Kathleen, and their young daughter at the time. During a session with his wife Kathleen one evening, while their daughter slept rooms away, ZOZO would once again make itself present in their lives, but this time seemed to take possession of Darren. Kathleen trembled with fear and bated breath as something stared at her through Darren's eyes, something that clearly wasn't human. He then turned violent, attempting to attack her. Fortunately for Kathleen, she was able to say goodbye and get away before any harm could be done to her. Several minutes later, Darren would come back to himself with no memory of what had taken place. After this session, things seemed to escalate in intensity. Sounds began to wrap throughout the entire home, from knocking to hissing, footsteps and banging, all seemingly with no explainable origin. The family got so terrified that they sectioned off a particular bedroom upstairs, calling it their safe room. One night, however, not everyone was within the safe room. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of terror creeped upon Darren. As he was trying to sleep, he rushed to the safe room to attempt to stop what he was feeling, but quickly realizing he couldn't leave his family behind, he rushed back out of the room in an attempt to gather them and bring them to safety as well. As he was heading towards the stairs, his daughter had heard his cries and was now at the foot of the stairs. It was here that Darren saw her being lifted by invisible hands into the air and carried away from him. Screaming for his child as she screamed for her father, Darren ran down the stairs as fast as he possibly could, but couldn't see her anywhere in sight. He then heard her muffled screams coming from the basement. At first the door was locked and wouldn't open, but after adrenaline and brute force, Darren thankfully was able to open it. He then retrieved his hysterical child and brought her to the safety of the safe room. Once inside the room, the family huddled together in fear as they continued to hear movement and noises all throughout the house. After this abhorrent nightmare of a situation, the family knew they had to get out of the house. This situation and the many other paranormal experiences had led to a lifelong fascination for Darren Evans with the occult and finding out just exactly what ZOZO is. But was it worth jeopardizing his family's safety? It took some time, but the family would soon relocate to another home. Once his family was safe, Darren was able to continue his deep dive into the unknown to try and track down and decipher just what this entity could be and where it came from. And although he knew the topic was vast, I think it went far deeper than he ever anticipated. Whilst trying to dig up more information, he posted his experiences to an old paranormal forum in 2009, and since then many people have shared their experiences with the demonic force, many of which have been documented and compared by Darren himself on his website. But these experiences are not just a 21st or even 20th century phenomenon. They date back far older than that. Not every fine detail will be mentioned here, but I will do my best to list the most important details that I could find in regards to the origin of ZOZO. According to Darren and other online sources, ZOZO in the Old Basque language means blackbird, or crow. The Zo people of Haiti practiced a form of voodoo whose rituals involve horrific scarification as well as the intake and passing around of bodily fluids and bizarre rituals. Their witch doctors are called ZOZO and wear demonic-looking masks as part of their death ritual. When someone is passing away, they lift up the mask at the moment of death to take in the person's final breath. This is apparently done to absorb the soul of the person to gain more spiritual power. ZOZO, also in the Malay language, is the same as it is in English, but it translates to wandering spirit, which is a spirit they believe to steal people's souls while they sleep, which is also bizarre because sleep is often considered the cousin of death. ZOZO has been called the minister of deception. It is known to convince you that it is a deceased loved one or friend, or even someone you've idolized, when in reality it's not. Sessions typically start out friendly and inviting, but soon turn malevolent and dangerous during his research over the years. Darren made contact with and spoke to famous demonologist John Zaffis, who shared with him that in his experience of over 40 years of studying the demonic and paranormal, the name ZOZO and other pseudonyms of its name kept coming up in his investigations, which too led him to seek answers as to what it could be in some of those investigations when questioned. The demon stated that it was the son of Satan himself, but Zappos thinks, perhaps as with many deities that seem to be lurking in the shadows, ZOZO could be an entity that's existed far before the founding of Christianity. Besides evidence showing up in Africa and Egypt, there's also evidence found linking ZOZO to ancient Mesopotamia as well. Other names ZOZO has gone by throughout the ages have been Zuzu, Zaza, and Mama, among many others. The name Zuzu could refer to Pazuzu, the famed demon from the film The Exorcist, which in reality was a demonic entity from ancient Mesopotamian religion. It's incredibly strange to note the following as well. ZOZO was replaced in the story of the exorcism of Roland Doe. When Peter Blatty was using it as inspiration to write The Exorcist, he changed ZOZO to Pazuzu. ZOZO is believed to be the demon that possessed Roland. It was described as a terrifying form that first appeared in the Neo-Assyrian period, roughly around 934 to 610 BC. It had a monstrous head resembling a fierce lion or a dog with horns, and had an emaciated human body with clawed hands, a scorpion's tail and 2 sets of wings. One translation reads, I am Pazuzu, the son of Hanbu, king of the Lilu demons. I have scaled the powerful mountains. They trembled. The contrary winds were headed west. One by one I broke their wings. Pazuzu and other demons like it were held responsible for ailments like disease, fetal death, nightmares, and much more. Could it be that this ancient demonic force is what could be plugging people all the way into modern times? The demon ZOZO is also mentioned in the French demonic encyclopedia as one of the demons responsible for diabolical possession and corruption. The possession of a young girl in 1816 is noted as a documented case where ZOZO, among several other demons, were present. Other noteworthy possession cases over the ages, ranging closer to modern times, that bears ZOZO's name, other than the exorcism of Roland Doe in the 1950s, are the possession of Doris Blyther in 1972 in Los Angeles, the Enfield poltergeist incident in 1977 in the UK, and as recent as 2012 where a possession incident led to an attempted murder. Other theories with how this entity could communicate with so many people so quickly and across the globe over the years, besides supernatural ability of its own, would be that its own reach is perhaps being strengthened by an egregore or collective group of thought form created by occultists for a certain purpose. However, this seems unlikely, considering the entity doesn't seem to serve any human interest other than to destroy the person or people's lives it makes contact with. Egregores are typically formed to bring control over a summoned deity for the person or group's bidding, but perhaps instead there is a cult worshipping ZOZO. I mean, that would make more sense to me. People who have made contact with the entity via a spirit or Ouija board have also been asked to chant or spell out phrases in Hebrew or Latin, which has convinced many of the intelligence of the being they're speaking with. What is also interesting is that the letter Z was actually removed from the original Latin alphabet because it was considered too evil when pronouncing it. It was said that one's face would make a death's grimace like that of a corpse, and that it mimicked the letter S like an evil twin. Perhaps the entity uses this name as some sort of mocking, whether to God or something else. One may also ask, despite the origin theories and historical details that could be linked to this ancient demonic force, how would one know if they encountered such a thing? These are what's known as ZOZO's calling cards when it's being summoned using a Ouija board. The obvious is there that the planchette will begin to move on its own, but some less obvious signs are there as well and are as follows. The planchette will move in a rainbow pattern from side to side, spelling ZOZO. Over and over again, also known as the rainbow effect. It can also move in repeating figure 8 movements like an infinity sign. The planchette will spell out various versions of the demon's name like ZOZO, Zozo, Zaza, Zuzu, or Mama. You may also begin to see shadows moving around the area where you are hosting the session, like you're seeing through the thinnest sheet into a dark world that exists just behind your vision. And you, and whoever you may be with, may start to feel scared, uneasy, or upset, seemingly for no other reason before or after this takes place when you tell this entity goodbye. Typically the best way to close a session. It may not truly be goodbye because oftentimes, depending on how long the session has been for, like an ever-widening door, the entity may have had just enough time to sneak in to begin to wreak havoc upon your life. And thus begins what many demonologists and religious leaders alike call demonic obsession, which is where the entity becomes aware of you and begins to crave you. Which then leads to oppression, where it begins to inflict various forms of torture upon you in an effort to break you down, whether that's physically, psychologically, or spiritually. It will also work to isolate you from others, especially those who care about you. And finally, if you're incredibly unlucky, possession. Or the entity finally takes control of you as its vessel, all of which to me are absolutely terrifying in every imaginable way. Darren Evans to this day continues to research the ZOZO phenomena, having been involved in a number of paranormal investigations, shows, and various other public and private events, as well as radio shows and podcasts. Many of which he goes into various degrees of details regarding his encounters, other people's encounters, and other various historical details. He also, in 2016, compiled his year's worth of research and experiences into a book also titled The ZOZO Phenomena, which you can read and learn more about the entity and the topic as a whole if you're interested. I'll link it below. I also pulled a lot of this information from various interviews, which I'll also be linking below, as well as an older website he runs that doesn't seem to have been updated in a while, but supplied me with much information to get the story as cohesive as I possibly could. I also sourced the photos of the apparitions from this site, some of which were taken by Evans himself over the years. So does this demon or ancient force truly exist? Is it some kind of elder god, a pre-Christian deity or being, or manifestation of occult or Luciferian practices? Did Darren Evans just make it up? And did thousands of people find it interesting enough to make up their own stories and partake in a mass charade that has lasted years? All of these answers may never truly be known, but my opinion is this. I think not only given the wide array of strange coincidences and details throughout history, from the origins to the stories of this creature existing in distant past to the present, to literally thousands of people, from casual interest in the occult to more hardcore fanatics, religious scholars, demonologists and more claiming to have had experiences with this thing. With all of these details in mind, I certainly think it very well could be real. I do think there are things that exist in the shadows, things we can't see or touch, but that are there watching and waiting to strike when and if the opportunity presents itself. So my advice to all of you: to avoid any possibility of opening a door that you can't close and inviting evil into your life is this. Don't mess with Ouija boards. These things are not toys. And whether you believe it or not, these entities do exist and they believe in you. So keep away from them because you might just let something in that won't want to leave even if you say goodbye. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do me a huge favor and hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Comment your thoughts below, help us out in the algorithm, and subscribe with notifications if you're new here. With all that out of the way, I do just want to say a few words before we reach the end of the year. 2022 has had a wide range of ups and downs for me. Thankfully more ups than downs. But I couldn't have done any of this without each and every one of you. I've read a ton of comments and I've had many conversations with many of you over this last year, and many of the time when I was feeling down or discouraged. And those interactions always helped me power through and make it through the days, weeks and months when I truly needed it. So thank you guys so much, and I truly mean that. I also have empathized with many of you about your hardships in life, which often dwarf my own. And one thing I also wanted to add was this. Anytime I mention membership or merchandise or anything of that nature, it is truly just my attempt to keep as independent as possible on my end. But you just being here, you watching me and you taking the time is more than enough for me, to be honest. And I always want you guys to prioritize yourself, your living situation and your families, as well as your mental, physical and just overall your health first and foremost before I ever cross your mind. With all that being said, I wish you all a wonderful 2023. I hope you'll be here for some awesome content that I have in store for you. Until next time, guys, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Stay safe out there and take care.